Roundtable Osteuropa, ein Podcast des Zentrums für Osteuropa und internationale Studien.
At this point, I'm sure every one of our listeners has heard that Vladimir Putin is obsessed with history. As we all know, the Russian president has justified this full-scale military invasion of neighboring Ukraine with historical references. Days before the invasion, Putin claimed that Ukraine was an artificial state, and I quote, entirely and fully created by Bolshevik Russia, that now found itself in a so-called colony of the West. On the day of the full-scale invasion itself, Putin equated the United States and NATO to Nazi Germany in referencing Stalin's failed attempts at appeasing Hitler, and he vowed that, I quote, "We will not make this mistake a second time." But the fight over historical interpretations did not begin in February 2022. One important turning point occurred back in 2004, when Central and East European countries joined the European Union, and as a result, their own historical interpretations, which questioned the Russian narrative at its very core, gained more international visibility. The sticking point in that regard is how Poland or the Baltic countries today view the arrival of the Red Army not as liberation, but rather as a second occupation that only ended in 1989 and 1991 respectively. The fight over historical interpretation is, moreover, not unique to contemporary Russia. We see it much nearer home, for instance in the nostalgic historical language of the far-right and populist parties in Germany, France or Poland. In the political discourse of the AfD, the Rassemblement National or PiS, we prominently find appeals to a lost heartland or a country's glorious and noble history, which sidelines tragic events of national guilt. In these nostalgic references to the past, populists contrast an idealist past to the negative present. If we look at the electoral success of such parties, it seems that nostalgia has indeed a mobilizing force across societies. And we can see these traces of nostalgia when we walk into supermarkets and we see products that want to bring back the good old days when chocolate tasted much more like chocolate and when the meat you consumed always came from happy animals. So today I would like to discuss the use of history and in particular of nostalgia in Russia and beyond with two wonderful colleagues of mine. They've both been working on how to portray and exhibit contemporary history. So with me in the studio today, I've got Oleg Lutohin, who worked at the Boris Yeltsin Presidential Center in Yekaterinburg as the head of the educational department since 2016, and he directed the Boris Yeltsin Presidential Museum from 2021 to 2022. Since November 2022, he has held a scholarship from the international exchange program Memory Work, funded by the Bundesstiftung Aufarbeitung. Welcome to the podcast, Oleg. And then also with me today is Dr. Jörg Morré. He is a historian and he's worked also for a couple of years as a teacher. And since 2019, he directs the museum Karlshorst. He's also a member of the scientific advisory board of the German War Graves Commission, Volksbund Deutsche Kriegsgräberfürsorge, and the German-Russian Historians Commission.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
My name is Félix Krawatzek. I'm one of the researchers here at ZOIS, and I've got an interest in everything related to memory, migration, and youth. So let's get the first important thing out of the way. What is nostalgia for you? Jörg, do you want to give me your nutshell definition?
Yes, in very simple words, it's a good feeling about the past. So going back, or how can I say, everyone has a past. So thinking about the past, there are good things and bad things, and nostalgia is thinking about the good things. So it's a kind of time out in present times, going back in memory and feeling good about it. So, and it's a bit different from tradition, because tradition is how can I say, it's a connection between the present time and the past time, and nostalgia is closed down. So it's a kind of fleeing into a good mood, and it's feeling. This is very important. So in museums we are working with feelings as well. So giving a good example in the past, it is giving maybe a good feeling to the auditory, to the people. And yeah, that's the thing or the trick how to make politics.
Okay. Also reminds me a little bit almost of a romance with the past, the way you are describing it.
Yeah, that's a good impression. Yeah, it's a kind of romance. And if you go to a museum, for example, but the same thing going to the cinema, for example, or theater, whatever. So it's a kind of advertising, coming to us, having a good time for 2 hours, going back to whatever. And yeah, in the museums, we are, of course, we are working with this. So it's not only feel good, but for example, in Germany, we have these GDR museums. This is about feeling good. It's all showing the stuff from GDR and nothing more. It's not very historical, I would say. It's just to show the equipment when we had a good time in the GDR.
Excellent. That's certainly something we'll pick up later on in the discussion. But I would like to bring you in, Oleg. From your perspective, what is nostalgia? How would you describe it?
Yeah, thank you, Felix. Of course, Dr. Morré is completely right here. Nowadays, it's all about good feeling. But back in the days, it was kind of a medical condition. And I like the way cultural anthropologist Dominic Boer defines nostalgia in its relationship with the phenomena of the nation and early nationalism. He addressed Johannes Hofer's dissertation of 1688. Hofer wrote his dissertation in Basel, Switzerland, 500 kilometers from his hometown, Mühlhausen, here in Germany. Well, to make it simple, you are sick because you have been outside of your fatherland for too long. And of course, nowadays, nostalgia is not a medical condition anymore and relates mostly to the past, a particular period of time rather than a particular place or country. But if we speak about nostalgia for the Soviet period or nostalgie, a particular type of nostalgia for DDR, categories of time and place kind of coincide.
Thank you, Oleg. Then let me continue with you. So you're now at Zeus on your scholarship, as I mentioned, and you have a research project that engages with this question of nostalgia in the GDR and comparing it with nostalgia in Russia. So as a first question, could you explain to our listeners what brought you to be interested in this question that you're exploring here?
Yeah, you're right. And I just mentioned there are two different kinds of nostalgia I'm interested in. Nostalgia for the USSR. It has no special word so far. Maybe I can find one. And nostalgia for the DDR, so-called Osteuropa. The first one disturbs me since the days I was a museum director in the first presidential center in Russia, also known as Yeltsin Center. The core project of this huge multifunctional center is the Boris Yeltsin Museum. The central place in the exhibition is occupied by the events of 1991, the collapse of the USSR and the emergence of the democratic forms of governance in Russia. It was made a huge team of various professionals. To give you a few names, Russian film director Pavel Lungin and International Bureau Ralph Appelbaum Associates. It is hard to name a Russian public politician who would do more for the decommunization of Russia than Boris Yeltsin did. And in this sense, the museum named after him tells exactly this story, the story of the transition from the gray, stagnant Soviet past to a bright, free future. But even in such a non-Soviet museum, nostalgic emotions could not be avoided. Even in a hall that recreates the empty shelves of a late Soviet store, meant to illustrate the depth of the collapse of the Soviet economic system and the need for change, visitors look at the birch of sap cans, like березовый сок, the birch sap cans, and exclaim, "Oh, I remember very well how we stood in lines with those coupons." And, you know, it is difficult to say what is more in this exclamation. Uncomfortable feelings or present memories of the past. That's how nostalgia for the USSR, the first type of nostalgia, provoked my interest.
And the second?
And the second nostalgia, Ostalgie, interested me last summer when I had a chance to attend a visiting trip to Germany under the topic how Germany is dealing with the history of the 20th century. Among other remarkable events, the program included meeting with the members of the Bundestag Committee on Culture and Media. In the Q&A section, I wonder where there is a nostalgia for the communist past in today's Germany, and to what extent this is a political issue for contemporary German society. A deputy from Die Grünen, who lives in the eastern outskirts of Berlin, argued that there is no such a thing as nostalgia for the Soviet times, but there might be a nostalgia for the times of the GDR. So, what is the difference, I wondered? Live in Berlin without receiving a satisfactory answer to my question, I decided that an analysis of different modes of memory in Germany could provide me a better understanding of memory work in my own country, in Russia, in order, and of course in the other Soviet Republic. Soon I applied to the memory work program provided by the Bundesstiftung Aufarbeitung, and Félix, thanks again for having me here as a visitor researcher in SOIS.
With great pleasure. So we can already see that there is a lot to be gained by comparing Germany and Russia, as unintuitively it might seem at first glance. And Jörg, on that, I would like to pass it on to you, because you've been working for a long time now on thinking about how to exhibit German and Soviet history in one museum. You are the director, as I said, of the Museum Berlin-Karlshorst, which is a museum focused on the war between the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany from 41 to 45. And we all know that World War II memory is abused without any shame in today's Russia. And you, as a response to the full-scale invasion, decided to rename the museum in early 2022. Tell us a little bit more about that decision, and to what extent it is a decision that was triggered by the escalation in February, or whether it's actually in some way a conclusion of a much older debate that you had in the institution.
Mm-hmm. First of all, some words about the museum as an institution, because it's a museum and a memorial site, so it's both. And as a museum, we have a topic. Yeah, this is the war, Soviet-German war of annihilation, German war of annihilation against Soviet Union, beginning in June 41, up to 45. It's the historical place where the Wehrmacht surrendered, 8th of May 45. This is the one side. And the other side is a memorial place, a historic place. So there are feelings. There are national feelings. There are good and bad feelings. There's remembering, and there are acts of remembering. So a kind of culture of remembering. How to remember what happened there in Karlshorst. So, and this makes it a bit tricky for our museum just to work as a professional museum. And that's why we're so irritated by what's going on. The debate about the name of the museum is a bit older, and already in 2015, I guess, we discussed, after renewing our permanent exhibition, that it might be better to name, or to claim, better to say, to claim the museum historical place of surrender of the Wehrmacht, 8th of May or May 45. So this is what we are doing now. And when the museum was founded, it's about 30 years ago, in 1994, there, as a symbolic act, it was very important to say, okay, it's a German-Russian museum, so two former enemies, two states, two societies are working together in front of the history, in the background with this history when they fought against. So this was very important for a certain time. So, and now we have very different politics. We are protesting against what the Russian Federation, the Russian government is doing with the war against Ukraine. And that's why we reacted very, very fast, showing only the Ukrainian flag in front of our museum and wiping out this German-Russian in our name. In a how can I say, in a very formal sense, it is this is our name. We have already for 30 years. So when we were founded as an association, Verein in German, the name of this association was in 1994 Museum Berlin Karlshorst. So we went back to this official naming, but of course it's a kind of renaming because we changed our claim, our branding.
Thank you very much for those insights. That's really interesting. Could you extend a little bit more on maybe what other things have changed in the relationship of the museum to partnering countries? I understand that you are working with a number of former Soviet countries and the national museums in these now independent countries. How has that relationship with them individually changed since February 2022?
More or less, in some way good, and in some way there's no communication at the moment. So, of course, it's in technical sense it's possible to make a call to Moscow or whatever, but we don't do it because what to tell on the telephone or via Zoom or internet or whatever. There's no way of free communication. So that's why we stopped it, and in political sense we were set to stop the communication. This is the official political behavior in Germany, no contact to the Russian state. But of course, we are interested as historians, as musicians, we are interested in how we can, whether we stop our work and cutting down this, cooperation and tradition and this process, I would say, or is there any perspective how to continue? And it's an ongoing discussion at the moment. One thing I will add, the first step going a bit apart from this cooperation was made already end of 2021, because this at that moment the organization Memorial was forbidden, or was a process. And we protested because we said Memorial, as a partner in doing research on history, what they did, or still doing. This is for us, for historians, for a historical museum, this is not good. And so this is a kind of destroying our common sense, our common basic. And so we started, and then the attack on Ukrainian. So the war is already ongoing for 8 or 9 years. It's the 9th year at the moment. But the attack of the invasion of which was made a year before, of course, this is another turning point. And this altogether brought us to the point to say, okay, at the moment there's no place for discussions, there's no room, no possibility for free exchange of our opinions and perspectives.
Yeah, so we see how these really tectonic political shifts, what they mean on the everyday life and functioning of every one of these institutions at the moment, concerned with questions related to Eastern Europe. And alongside these big political developments and how they influence your work, I would be interested to hear a few words from you. But what does that make with your visitors? Have you come across any, different debates that have taken place at the museum since, really over the last few years? I mean, as you rightly described it, this has been a process that has been going on for longer than just February 22. What are the maybe one or two most striking examples you could give us of visitor experiences that have changed since?
Yes, we have. So when we have nowadays in the evening our lectures and roundtables, whatever, there's our visitors want to discuss. So if there is no connect to the ongoing history, to the ongoing politics, better to say it, or to the war, they switch over to this topic. So every night we have a lecture, we are discussing about the ongoing politics. And in our museum, so on the one hand, we are getting more and more visitors because the corona pandemic is over. So this is a technical approach, you can say. But so we have a a book where the visitors can write down their impressions, and they are very often, quite regular. There are protests. Why is there only one flag in front of the museum? Where is the Russian flag? You have a very good permanent exhibition, but please show the Russian flag as well.
And is this from Russians? I mean, can you decipher the handwriting a bit? What education these people might have had?
I guess these are Germans. Maybe it's a kind of nostalgia, and our neighbors who are very close to the museum and the history of this place, and thinking about World War II without Russia, and Russia means in this sense Soviet Union or the other end round, is not possible because there's this kind of protest.
Okay, I'd like to bring you in, Oleg. You've left Russia last year, and previously you were heading one of the country's most important liberal historical museums. And of course, the conditions that Jörg described don't exist in Russia, but you still probably wanted to respond to February 2022. So what has the war's escalation last year changed for your museum?
Yeah. The key moment here, of course, is February 25th, 2022. The day after the beginning of the full-scale invasion, we came up with the demand to stop the war. We published it at the homepage of our website and prepared to the complete closing. I mean, for 7 years of Yeltsin Center's work, we kind of got used to violent criticism, hate speeches in the media, threatening emails. But then, in the long February of 2022, which still seems to be going on, it felt like it was over, like completely. But this was before the law on discrediting the Russian army was adopted. Perhaps that is partly why the Yeltsin Center survived. Perhaps there are other reasons which I'm not confident about. But let me go back to your question, Felix, on visits and guests and how it affects on our museum. Obviously, there are less foreign visitors and less loud events nowadays. We used to have a huge festival in almost every summer. It was called Slova и muzika svobody, words and music of freedom. Of course, nowadays it's just not possible. Yeah, and you know, I haven't been to the museum in 6 months, but I remember well the tours I took in 2022, the excursions I gave to our visitors. And, you know, it seems to me at that time our visitors began to cry more in the exhibition. The exhibition, the museum, it's effective and emotional by design. Film director Lungin, with help of Ralph Felbaum, did his best, you know, in that sense. And the participants, I want to talk a bit about the participants of these events, which are still alive, obviously, the events which our exhibition presented. And those of them who came to the White House in 1991 against GKChP, they are still alive, and sometimes they visit our museum. And especially for them, they are so-called the Democrats of the first wave. It is a museum of that symbolic capital that which hopelessly wasted in the pursuit of comfort and wealth nowadays. And the only thing that I can hope that it is not wasted to the end, you know. It became more emotional, the whole museum itself, the exhibition itself, and it showed some aspects which not put there by its designers. You know, just opened up with the whole events.
Yeah, thanks for providing those insights, Oleg. And you mentioned that visitors cried more, you said, when they walked through the exhibition. Could we say, to return to our opening question, I mean, are these the visitors that are nostalgic about the Yeltsin years and the 1990s, or what is your explanation for that?
Yeah, good question. Really good question. Yeah, answering this, I want to address you to the biggest and artistic exhibit in the whole exhibition. At the very end of it, in the Hall of Freedom, there is a picture of very well-known Russian artist Eric Bulatov. It's called Freedom, or Liberty, Svoboda in Russian. Just to imagine, it's a huge monumentalist artwork, piece of art, where the word freedom goes to the perspective. The first capital is big, and the last one S is big, and A is go to the perspective into the sky. And when we opened the museum in 2015, it was completely clear to me that this freedom, Svoboda, came to us from the clouds, from the sky. And nowadays, when our visitors came and to the end of our exhibition, to the end of this Lungin's narrative, it obviously for them that it goes away to the sky.
That freedom is fading. That's a very strong,
Yeah. Just an image, just one thing, and it's hard to say if that's a nostalgia. Probably those people I told about, the defenders of Russian democracy in 1991, they can feel this nostalgia, and it's not about pleasure. It's not about pleasant thing, as you, Dr. Morré, mentioned. Speaking about DDR museum, it's more about pathology, because actually nostalgia came up with two Greek words: nostos, the will to come home, and algos, which is grief or pain. So nowadays, unfortunately, it's more about pain.
It's very interesting because for Germans going to a museum, that means this is a lesson in history. It's something closed. So there is no direct connection between me in present times and no connection to future. So such an installation as you made, and I've seen it in different museums in Russia, in Ukraine, and the Baltic states. We don't do this in Germany. Maybe it's a fault or not, but in technical sense, it's very interesting, and that's why the museum of GDR, the DDR Museum, are working so well, because it's just a bit of the past, no connection to the present and to the future, no perspective, nothing. It's just showing something about the past, and that's it.
Yeah. And we have kind of an open ending.
Yeah,
great.
So if we're not so sure if that crying and the fading of freedom is what Russians are nostalgic about, what, Oleg, in your opinion, are some of the elements where you feel certain that this is something a big share of Russian society feels?
Well, Felix, I don't think we can highlight the specific elements of the past here, but I recall Vitaly Mansky's documentary, Putin's Witnesses. In one of the last scenes, filmed in the very beginning of the year 2001, so the first year Putin was a president, the director asked the new president of our country why the Soviet anthem adopted under Stalin was returned, with a couple differences in words, but the music is still the same, Alexandrov's music. And Putin recalls how during his visit to Lensk, that's Republic of Sakha, Yakutia, a woman asked him, "Give us back our old life as it used to be 20 years ago." So the reason behind this anthem comeback was exactly that nostalgia. They need people, and I quote here, they need people to feel that not everything had been taken from them. And Putin continues, "Why can't we, while listening to Alexandrov's music, think not of the Gulag camps, but of greatness and victory in World War II?" That's his words. So, again, it is hard to figure out the exact element of nostalgia, but the whole mood of the huge country, of big empire, of good times with less responsibility, with less risks. Probably that's what for most of it people are nostalgic about. And I wonder if there are some motives in nostalgia here. Probably not. We'll see.
Yeah, it is, I guess, a good illustration of that selection of past elements with which you have entertain your romance as a society that you can build your own identity on. Jörg, to you again, you've already mentioned the GDR museums, which are one place where nostalgia certainly is exhibited. But bringing it to your own museum, does that term even make sense, thinking about the museum that you direct? Are there elements where you can sometimes understand that they trigger nostalgia, or where visitors reflect that back? And if you could maybe give one or two examples for our listeners.
Yes, of course there are. Yeah, the most impressive object exhibit is our tank 34 in front of our museum on a like a memorial place. And so it's not just a tank showing as an exhibit. It's a designed memorial place. It was made more than 50 years ago by the Soviet troops when they started making this place a museum. And they run it as a memorial, not as a museum. And and it works still today. It works with all the new perspectives and new edits, I would say, made by the Russian politics. And yes, it gives the possibility to attend or to give a good platform for the Russian propaganda. So this is our dilemma, because for us, for the museum, it's an exhibit. It's a bit of the past, and as I pointed out already, in our German technical sense of museum, there's no connection to the present, but it is, and it works. So. And the next point is, when I said the museum is not only a museum, we are a forum, we are a place of bringing people together from different societies and countries and so on, generations. So East Germans, West Germans, Russians living in Berlin, Russians coming from the Russian Federation, speaking Russian, whatever. So everyone has the chance to be triggered by our tank, for example, and it works. So this is what we are coping with, and this is our huge problem. In one sense, it's nice to be an open place, a forum, but you can't handle. So, and this is what we are looking for, a good way to have a perspective, a future as a museum, and not to be misused by any propaganda.
Yeah, that's the big challenge, that all of these objects, they don't have a meaning inscribed in them by themselves, but each group appropriates the tank, as you illustrate.
Yes, and the tank is a tank. It's a weapon. It's a huge weapon. It's there are so strong feelings, and I'm thinking, for example, if it might be possible to build a with the glass, a house around the tank, so to organize a distance between the visitor and the exhibit. This is how museums are working. So I think this might be a good way for our museum to change a bit, because for the last 50 years we tried to show the history of the museum, the history of the house. So this is ongoing, like a chronic. There are different, historic periods in the history of the house, but it's all connected. So it might be better to make a huge break and to say, no, there is no continuity. It's a break, and we have still the same exhibit, but we show it in a different way.
So that brings us in a way to my last set of questions, and that relates to the kind of political use then of the past, because the decision that you described will be a hugely political one, and that is, at the start of the podcast, I mentioned that populists in European Union countries, they like to use the past. They like to use nostalgia to generate positive feelings and bring the electorate together. Jörg, maybe you briefly, could you think a little bit for us about, with all your experience as a museum director, I mean, we want positive memories about the past. We want to tell people, have a feeling good moment when they come to your museum as well and discover elements they have a positive connection with. But is there a way of preserving a positive memory of the past that is not itself automatically, almost it seems, slipping or providing a basis for this populist abuse of the past?
Yes, of course, because we Germans, we are used to having no good feelings thinking about World War II. So this is a kind of catharsis which we Germans are used to know, to feel. And looking on GDR history, it's a bit different. But for our topic, World War II, war of annihilation against Soviet Union. So this is no fun to have a look to this exhibition. Yes, it's possible. What is very tricky is this common view on history from very different perspectives in political sense. Different cultures of memory, different countries, and so on and so on. So this, intercultural exchange to separate this process from politics, because politics is always connected with certain aims and with politics or propaganda, whatever. So this is the challenge for the future, looking for this multi-perspective view in a multicultural approach without politics.
That's very interesting, because it's exactly also the debate that we have on the research side, this multi-perspectivity, and it's incredibly demanding on all levels, even for us as researchers, but also if you want to teach history. And then, of course, it needs to be accepted. Oleg, maybe last question for you on that topic. I mean, the multi-perspectivity on history is certainly not fashionable in Russia at the moment. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, is there any hope that we won't only see this exclusively nationalistic use of history in a future Russia, or are we in for that at the moment, and multi-perspectivity as a way maybe to reconcile and have more fruitful discussions about the past is something we should simply have absolutely no illusions given the Russian Federation's current situation?
Well, there are ways to avoid these things. Obviously, probably there are more, but let me stay with two that I see myself. To figure out if there is a place for non-elitist approach, speaking about national elite perspective that we have now nowadays, we have to listen to people's voice. It sounds simple, but it's not, it's easy to speak, not easy to do. But there are scientific tools for that, for listening to the people. The whole field of oral history. More than a year ago, we at the Yeltsin Center, at the Boris Yeltsin Museum, started the archive of oral history, exactly for that purpose. The Gulag Museum in Moscow, which has extensive experience in this area, helped us start this work. Their conversation with victims of state terror and their relatives are available on their YouTube channel, which I highly recommend it to you if you can listen to Russian language. That is something that helps us to understand what not allies think of all these things. It's not about history of politicians, of someone who making decisions. It's a history of real actors, people like you and me. There are many examples actually, and I want to mention just one more in that sense. Juliana Frost in Potsdam Leibniz Center just started the project Perestroika from Below. I think it is also about this multi-dimensional perspective on history, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the results of it. And the second way of engaging Russian history outside the frame of nationalistic elites is what is much discussed nowadays, this decolonial discourse. And here I will cite just in one example an exhibition that struck me and which is still going on in Kunstraum Kreuzberg. The project called OME. It's a Bashkortostan word for collective self-help practices. And it's gathered approximately 30 artistic expositions from members of indigenous communities and persons with migrant identities on the area of former Soviet Empire, Russian Empire, I would say. The artists are presenting in this exhibition, they sharing their experience of living in Russia nowadays. And I just recommend our Berlin listeners to visit it. It's available till the end of May. Probably these two things, oral history, the perspective of actual people, common people, and the decolonial discourse. That's what I want to point out.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to both of you for taking the time to discuss these topics with us. Thank you everyone for listening. I hope you found it at least as fascinating as myself to listen to and discuss with our two guests today. I invite you to tune back in soon to discover older episodes of Roundtable Osteuropa, or to just go to our website and explore the different research projects that we have available on there. Thank you very much again. Goodbye.